freely, Lord. We thank you for your grace and mercy. We thank you for the peace that surpasses understanding, Lord. We thank you that though the world is falling apart outside, we can remain calm because we can look up and know that our redemption is drawing near. And as we continue today in the book of Zechariah, Lord, I pray that you would implant these truths in our hearts, Lord, and open our eyes to see how relevant these things are today. That never is there a better time to look to our blessed hope than now, Lord. And we thank you that we have that hope, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. So before we get into Zechariah, I just wanted to touch on some topics that are kind of interesting, because I really do feel there's never a better time than now to look at our promised hope of the future. And that's what we're going to get into in Zechariah, because tonight we're going to be going into Zechariah 10. But I wanted to touch bases on some things that people may know may or may not be going on right now. So right now we live in a time where currently in Africa and in Eastern Africa, heading toward the Middle East, is perhaps the largest locust plague this century has ever seen. Right now in Africa, much like we've learned throughout the minor prophets, locusts would come as a form of judgment. Currently, right now, there is a large locust plague in Africa that they can't deal with. The size of the swarm, they think, is around 4 times the size of New York City, encompassing billions of locusts that are going all through the Middle East now. They're heading east. It is projected path to head through the Middle East eventually, through Saudi Arabia, maybe even up into the Israel-Syria area. This is going on right now. We don't know this because there's so much stuff going on in the world that it's like, oh, that's also going on. Australia has just had those fires that were nearly wiped out most of the country. Fire tornadoes were going on there, and millions of animals died. Right now, we're currently going through the acidification of the ocean, where the oxygen levels in the ocean are dying, which means the small plankton in the ocean that feed the entire wildlife in the ocean is slowly dying off, which means at some point in the future, there may not be much life left in the ocean. Today, we had the single largest drop in U.S. stock history. 2,300 points fell today. Many of us may not know that because it just happened. Yesterday there was another large drop. This week there's been constant drops. But today, not since 1987 have we seen a drop and a crash in the economy like this. Many of us have seen the housing crisis. Many of us have seen the economic tech boom. And we saw, I was too young. I don't remember which one it was in the 87. Do you guys? You may. But this is just one of another crash that is happening right now. So it's just kind of weird. These things are going on. So to me, it looks rather biblical. I don't know about you guys. It's starting to seem very biblical. Now, another interesting thing, and I remember, I forgot who here I was talking to about, but a while back, when all the wars and rumors of wars and famines and all these other things were going on, I remember I said the one thing. I'm really curious, because there's one thing missing in this trifecta, all these things going on, all these horsemen that we are noticing. Pestilence. Where's pestilence? It was about maybe 2-3 months ago when we started. I was going through the minor prophets, and I was just like, man, this is very current to now. The one thing that's missing is pestilence. And so it's just kind of funny that, as these things start to happen, but we remember, when these things start to occur, look up. Your redemption is drawing nigh. That's what's happening. Now, another thing that we have to remember, especially with all this pestilence and all this plague and all these rumors going around, people will die, period. People always die. Whether it's a car accident or it's the flu, people die. That happens. Now, I was listening to one virologist expert, and he had predicted something similar to this happening, and it's following his prediction so far pretty good. So he has a good mind on this topic. And he said we should expect in the U.S. 73 million infected. Just infected. That's 1/3 of the U.S. population. He said potentially, conservatively, 400,000 U.S. deaths in the at-risk age groups. That's a lot of people. There's a lot of people in the U.S., though. But this is not the first time the church has encountered plague. This is not the first time the church has encountered pestilence. And I want to read this real quick. I shall ask God mercifully to protect us. Then I shall fumigate, help purify the air, administer medicine and take it. I shall avoid places and persons where my presence is not needed in order not to be contaminated, and thus perchance inflict and pollute others, and so cause their death as a result of my negligence. If God should wish to take me, he will surely find me, and I have done what he has expected of me. And so I am not responsible for either my own death or the deaths of others. If my neighbor needs me, however, I shall not avoid a place or person, but will go freely as stated above. See, this is such a God-fearing faith, because it is neither brash nor foolhardy, and does not tempt God. Martin Luther, during the Black Plague. 75 million. 75 million dead. 400,000 U.S. deaths. What are we afraid of? Are we Christians? Do we know where our faith lies? Do we know where our hope lies? And I've often gone into dangerous places. I used to go be a prison chaplain. I used to go minister to the homeless. And oftentimes when talking about these experiences and the things I had encountered in those places, one question I often got, and the scary thing is it was often from Christians: how do you do that? Aren't you afraid? And that always bothered me. Because to me, what better way to enter the kingdom of heaven than to have gone into a jail and died while preaching the gospel there? What better way than to go feed the homeless and have my life taken there and enter the kingdom of heaven? That's a glorious death. And as we fear, people are saying, don't go to church, avoid large crowds, don't do these things. I don't know about you, but what better way to enter heaven than having knowing you died going to church? I don't know about you, that's great. Because I know one thing, I'm going to see him one day. Either he comes to me or I go to him. Either way, that's my reward, and that's where my hope is. So as we get into Zechariah, we have to remember the time that Israel is facing right here. Because in Zechariah's day, Israel was an empire that had fallen. They were thought to be lost. They had just been returned from exile. They had heard all these prophecies about what was to come. They have all these promises, but they're downtrodden. They had begun to build the temple, but had stopped. And Zechariah had come on the scene to give them all these hopes and promises. These things we have. We know we have these promises. We know we can trust God to do what he says. And so in Zechariah 10, it opens up with the restoration of Israel. And 10 opens up with, ask the Lord for rain in the time of the latter rain. The Lord will make flashing clouds. He will give them showers of rain, grass in the field for everyone. The latter rains in Israel, there was a spring and summer rain, or a fall and spring, or an autumn and spring rain. The autumn rain was the first rain. The spring rain was the latter rain that helped for the harvest. So it says, pray to give the latter rain. Pray that God will allow you to have that harvest. Pray, and grass will be for everyone. He will rain the crop. He will feed your people. He will provide. You just have to ask. In Psalm 57 through 15 it says, hear, O my people, I will speak, O Israel, and I will testify against you. I am God, your God. I will not rebuke you for your sacrifices or your burnt offerings, which are continually before me. I will not take a bull from your house, nor goats out of your fold, for every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the mountain, and the wild beasts of the fields are mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world is mine, and all its fullness. Will I eat the flesh of the bulls, or drink the blood of the goats? Offer to God thanksgiving, and pay your vows to the Most High. Call upon me in the day of trouble, and I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. That's the relationship that the Lord wants to have with Israel. It's not about all the sacrifices. It's not about giving to God. Israel doesn't come to God. We don't come to God and give him things that he doesn't already have. He has all these things. So he's telling Israel, learn to just call on me. He's told them this whole time, I will provide. And the reason is because Israel is coming out of a time where they relied on false things. And it goes on. For the idols speak delusions. The diviners envision lies and tell false dreams. They comfort in vain. Therefore the people wend their way like sheep. They are in trouble because there is no shepherd. My anger is kindled against the shepherds, and I will punish the goat herders. For the Lord of hosts will visit his flock. See, Israel had come from a time where their shepherds, their priests, their kings had led them astray. Because of the wickedness of the rulers, because of the false shepherds that had been over Israel, they had been brought into captivity. And the Lord is promising them that that day will come to an end, that the Lord is going to visit his flock. And this reminds me, because the Lord sees us as sheep, and in Israel he sees them lost, and he sees bad shepherds reigning over them. And as we talked about the angel of the Lord, and that the Jesus' heart has always been there through the angel of the Lord. And this reminded me instantly of Matthew 9:36. When Jesus saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion for them because they were weary and scattered, like sheep having no shepherd. That is always what happens in Israel's life. The shepherds stop doing what they're supposed to do. The people the Lord trusts to lead the people fail. That is what happened to Israel. And in Jesus' time, it didn't change. Remember, these promises are happening during the restoration of the temple. And then what? How many years later, Jesus shows up and it's still the same. So these promises, we know they're for a future time. But this is the thing. The Lord will punish those false shepherds. Everyone who would speak the name of the Lord or speak for the Lord and claim falsely will have an answer before the Lord. They will have to respond. They will have to answer when the Lord asks them, what you did with my flock. For every Joel Osteen out there, for every name it and claim it, blab it and grab it, prosperity now, plant your seed so I can get my jet, preacher, they will answer to the Lord. Because that is one crime that the Lord takes very seriously, is when the shepherds lead the flock astray. And it goes on, the house of Judah, and will make them as his royal horse in battle. For him comes the cornerstone, from him the tent peg, from him the battle bowl, from him every ruler together. They shall be like mighty men who tread down their enemy, and the mire of the streets in the battle. They shall fight because the Lord is with them, and the riders on the horses shall be put to shame. So he's telling them of a future day that will come, a future day that's coming to Israel one day, when the chief cornerstone, the tent pole, the one with the mighty bow will come and lead his people, who will strike down those false shepherds, those false teachers who had led them astray. And we see these promises, and we know that they're Jesus. We know they're Jesus because in Isaiah 22:23-24 it tells us, I will fasten him as a peg in a secure place, and he will become a glorious throne to his Father's house. That's Jesus, the tent peg. In Isaiah 63:1-4 it says, whom is this who comes from Edom, who dyed garments from Boraz? The one who is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength. I who speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Why is your apparel red and your garments like one who treads in the winepress? I have trodden the winepress alone, and from the people no one was with me. For I have trodden them in my anger and trampled them in my fury. Their blood is sprinkled upon my garments, and I have stained all my robes. For the day of vengeance is in my heart, and the year of my redeemed has come. That's a dangerous sounding thing, but the year of my redeemed, that's you. He is speaking about us, the redeemed. He is coming to fight for us in Isaiah. And it's promising them in Zechariah. That is who's coming one day to fight for you. Because when he stands with you, nothing can stand against you. And it says, I will strengthen the house of Judah, and I will save the house of Joseph. I will bring them back because I have mercy on them. They shall be as though I have not cast them aside. For I am the Lord their God, and I will hear them. Those of Ephraim shall be like mighty men, and their heart shall rejoice as if with wine. Yes, their children shall see it and be glad. Their heart shall rejoice in the Lord. When we have the Lord with us, we can stand against anything. There is no fear that we can't face. There's no tragedy or loss we can't endure. God doesn't promise to save us away from these troubles. He promises to give us the strength to see us through the troubles. He is telling Israel, it's going to be bad. Things are going to be rough. You're going to have to build. You're going to have to build the temple. You're going to go through all this stuff. But one thing you have is this promise that one day the Lord's fighting for you, that he's going to redeem you, that he's going to save. And when you have that promise, you can face anything. You can face virus. You can face disease. You can face the death of loved ones. You can face the crashing of your retirement funds. You can face the loss of a house. You can face anything when you know who stands next to you, who goes before you, who is fighting your battles. And that's these promises that he's giving Israel. And he goes on, I will whistle for them and gather them, for I will redeem them. And they shall increase as they once increased. I will sow them among the peoples, and they shall remember me in as far countries. They shall live together with their children, and they shall return. I will also bring them back from the land of Egypt and gather them from Assyria. I will bring them into the land of Gilead and Lebanon until no more room is found for them. He shall pass through the sea with affliction and strike the waves of the sea. And the depths of the river shall dry up. Then the pride of Assyria shall be brought down, and the scepter of Egypt shall depart. So I will strengthen them in the Lord, and they shall walk up and down in his name, says the Lord. They have a promise. The Jews always have that promise. Throughout the Bible, throughout the Old Testament, a new covenant has been promised to them, one that was fulfilled in Jesus, and also the land. The land is promised to them. Through Deuteronomy, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all of these have promises about this new covenant coming, this new day where Israel will be returned to the land. We also have the prophecy of the dry bones. This is why all these signs in the times that are going on right now matter. Because if all this stuff happened during Martin Luther's time, he would not worry or not think the rapture or the end of the church age or the end was coming. Because he was a Bible reading man, and there was one component missing through all of the trials that he went through. And through all the 1918 Spanish influenza, there was one component missing. And all these various times throughout history where the end looked like it was near, there was one component missing, one promise the Lord had, one that was not yet fulfilled. And that was Israel would have their land. So we now stand in a day and age where Israel has their land, and all these prophecies in the Bible are starting to look very relevant, and we may start to worry. We may start to panic. We may start to worry about death. We may start to worry about the future. But we have to remember these promises. The Lord is fighting for his redeemed. He's coming for his redeemed. So the only thing you should worry about is, are you the redeemed? That's it. Focus on that. Focus on Jesus. Look at the cross. Every time it looks dark out there, the promise I have in the cross. I don't care what's going on in my life. I can have peace by looking at the cross. That's it. And that's the point we have to get to, because that's what Zechariah is telling Israel. All this, remember, Israel is going through a bad time. They're desolate. And he's telling them, look, you're going to rule. You're going to have power. The Lord's going to fight with you. But yet we know that's not what happens in Israel's future. Yet the promises are there. Because Zechariah goes on in 11, and after all these promises, he reminds them there's still stuff going on in Israel. There's still work to be done with them. It's not all roses. Open your doors, O Lebanon, that fire may devour your cedars. Wail, O Cypress, for the cedar has fallen, because the mighty trees are ruined. Wail, O oaks of Bashan, for the thick forest has come down. There is the sound of wailing shepherds, for their glory is in ruins. There is the sound of roaring lions, for the pride of Jordan is in ruins. So he's telling them, yes, you're back in your land. Yes, I will restore. But many of these prophets, this prophecy right here, a lot of scholars think that points to the Rome conquering of Israel. We know it happens because when Jesus shows up on the scene, who's in charge of Israel? Rome. And this right here was the prophecy. Look, Israel's going to get attacked still. You're going to get your temple back. It's going to build, but you're still going to face adversity. You're still going to face trouble. And this is why. So he tells Zechariah, thus says the Lord my God, feed the flock for slaughter, whose owners slaughter them and feel no guilt. Those who sell them and say, blessed be the Lord, for I am rich, and their shepherds do not pity them. For I will no longer pity the inhabitants of the land, says the Lord, but indeed I will give everyone into his neighbor's hand and into the hands of his king. They shall attack the land, and I will not deliver them from their hand. So I fed the flock for slaughter, in particular the poor of the flock. I took for myself 2 staffs, the one I called Beauty and the other called Bonds, and I fed the flock. Israel is under false shepherds, even though they are restored. The Lord knows that these shepherds that are over Israel will still be wicked. They will not do what they're supposed to. When Jesus steps on the scene, he will still have to call them whitewashed tombs. But he says, in particular the poor of the flock, I took for my staff 2 staffs, the one I called Beauty and the other I called Bonds, and I fed the flock. There's still the remnant. There's still the remnant who hunger for the word. And it goes on, I dismissed the 3 shepherds in 1 month. My soul loathed them, and their soul also abhorred me. There's nothing a false prophet hates more than a truth-speaking prophet. Whenever you hear a false word said that sounds, you know it's wrong, you know it's not in the Bible, the one thing that man does not want to hear is a Bible-believing Christian who knows his word, who knows chapter and verse, who can open the Bible and say, that's wrong, it says it here. They abhor the truth. Then I said, I will not feed you. Let what is dying die, and what is perishing perish. Let those that are left eat each other's flesh. And I took my staff, Beauty, and I cut it in 2. And I might break the covenant which I had made with all these people. So it was broken on that day. Thus the poor of the flock were watching me, knew that it was the word of the Lord. He's putting on a play for them. He's showing them what is going to happen. The office of the shepherd, or the prophet, of the temple priest, and the Jewish king, the 3 shepherds that were supposed to watch over the land of Israel. The 3 wicked shepherds that even in Jesus' day would all be gone because they would be replaced. That covenant would be broken because of their disobedience. And as we know that, the new covenant, that is in Jesus, would come. But this is a showing of what is going on with these 3 rotten shepherds that had led Israel astray. Then I said to them, if it is agreeable to you, give me my wages, and if not, refrain. So they weighed out my wages, 30 pieces of silver. You see the prophecy that he's giving them. This is not a good wage, as we know. This is not a good sum for a prophet. And it is an awful sum for a Messiah. It is the price of a slave. Here in Zechariah, we are seeing the foreshadowing of what is to come. And the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, that princely price. That's sarcasm. They set on me, so I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord for the potter. Then I cut in 2 my other staff, bonds that I might break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. Do you see how right there in Zechariah, just in that little snippet of prophecy he's giving them, he's telling them of the coming Messiah. He's telling them of the betrayal of Judas. He's telling them of the false shepherds who that betrayal became through, who the money came through even. The exact dollar amount that Jesus would be betrayed to by the false prophets and the false shepherds and the false priests. And then the money would be thrown back into the house of the Lord for the potter. That is a prophecy that is fulfilled in Jesus. All right here in the Old Testament in Zechariah. Give me my wages, Zechariah. Oh, wait, hold on. He is playing this out for them when he shouts, give me my wages. He is giving them the new covenant. He is showing them what it is. And they're telling them it's only worth 30 pieces of silver. And in Matthew 27:9-10, it says, then was fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, and they took 30 pieces of silver, the value of him who was priced, who they are the children of Israel priced, and gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed. This is Matthew retelling of the Zechariah verse. You may notice, as many people who like to pick at the Bible tend to, it says Jeremiah, not Zechariah. Some scholars automatically point to and say, that's a mistake, the Bible's wrong. Problem with that is, other scholars think that Zechariah is actually quoting Jeremiah. And other scholars know that Jeremiah and Zechariah were part of the same scroll that was called Jeremiah. And so it was Jeremiah, and Zechariah was in Jeremiah. So it could also be that Jeremiah was quoting Zechariah when he wrote down his scroll. And that's why in Matthew it says in the book Jeremiah. Goes on, and the Lord said to me, next take for yourself the implements of a foolish shepherd. Now, this foolish shepherd we know is coming. This foolish shepherd we know will one day fool Israel. Because in this prophecy of the Messiah to come, there's also the prophecy of the false Messiah to come, the foolish shepherd, the one who will win over the world. For indeed I will raise up a shepherd in the land who will not care for those who are cut off, nor seek the young, nor heal those who are broken, nor feed those that stand still, but he will eat the flesh of the fat and tear the hoofs in pieces. That sounds like any false preacher to me. That sounds like any man who stands at a pulpit and tells you to plant a seed so that it can grow, who tells you your offering is not enough and that the Lord wants you to dig deep and give more. That's a false prophet. That's a false spirit. Woe to the worthless shepherd who leaves the flock. A sword shall be against his arm and against his right eye. His arm shall completely wither, and his right eye shall be totally blind. That's how we know the Antichrist is going to be struck with a wound. And we also know that his right eye is going to be blind, because the false shepherd is the Antichrist. But he goes on in Zechariah 12. The burden of the word of the Lord against Israel. Thus says the Lord, who stretches out the heaven, lays the foundations of the earth, and forms the spirit of man within him. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding peoples, when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all peoples. All who would heave it away will surely be cut in pieces, though all the nations of the earth gathered against it. In that day, says the Lord, I will strike every horse with confusion and its rider with madness. I will open my eyes on the house of Judah and will strike every horse of the people with blindness. This is a prophecy of the future. This is a prophecy I believe we're seeing the beginnings of now. Israel is surrounded on all sides by enemies. The Gog-Magog war seems like it could happen sooner than later. There's a lot of developments in Israel right now going on. They found that oil field that's attracting a lot of Russian attention. One of the major reasons for the stock market crash, which everyone's not really talking about, is not just the coronavirus. One thing that they said was that the stock market has been bound for a rebound for quite some time. One of the other reasons that no one's really talking about, because that one's a little scarier, Russia and Saudi Arabia have decided to go to war over pricing on oil. What did Israel just find just a few years ago in their waters, territorial waters? Massive oil reserves. So right now our economy is crashing, the world's economy is crashing, because you have two major oil producers going to war about pricing. Right now Russia says they can keep the prices lower than Saudi Arabia can. Saudi Arabia says they can. Both of them are mad at the U.S. because of our industrial shale production, our oil production. It's costing, the world market is not used to us producing oil. They're used to us consuming oil. Us producing more oil than the rest of the world right now is upsetting people. That situation could easily boil over. It's economic now, but it could turn. And if Israel is in Russia's sights, Saudis are allies, we're poking all of this, these things can start happening. So we have to be aware of all these things. And again, it's funny, isn't it? 2,000 years, 2,500 years later, and we're still talking about Israel? A nation that didn't exist for how many years? And suddenly, this heavy stone that the whole world is concerned about, this stone that's causing people to act drunkenly and stupid, is a country that has no significance in the world, other than the fact the Bible says it's his chosen people. Isn't that funny? All of this is happening right now in our eyes. And the governors of Judah shall say in their hearts, the inhabitants of Jerusalem are my strength, and the Lord of hosts their God. In that day I will make governors of Judah like a fire pan in a woodpile, and like a fiery torch in sheaves. They shall devour all the surrounding peoples on the right hand and on the left, but Jerusalem shall be inhabited again in her own place, Jerusalem. There's a day coming where the Lord will fight for Israel, and Israel will know who their God is. It is something we always have to remember when we think of Israel. They don't need us. We bless Israel because God tells us to, but Israel's strength comes from the Lord, just like ours should. And in that day, he will empower them. One of the things we see, and we've seen it in our own history, recent history, the Lord protects Israel. If you ever want to look into weirdness of the Lord protecting someone, go look at the 7-Day War. The 7-Day War was amazing. You had reports, if you want to see confusion and blindness and drunkenness among the enemies of Israel, go look at the reports of the 7-Day War. If you read those reports, you read the Israeli generals, those soldiers who were fighting on that field on that day, they knew the Lord was with them. Because Israel doesn't need anyone to protect them. The Lord will fight for them. But in that day, this is a future prophecy of the coming of the Lord, because in that day, that is a day when they will realize something. And I will pour on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look on me who they pierce. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn. In that day there shall be great mourning in Jerusalem, like the mourning at Hadar-Rimmon in the plain of Megiddo. And the land shall mourn, every family by itself, the family of the house of David by itself, and their wives by themselves. The family of the house of Nathan by itself, and their wives by themselves. The family of the house of Levi by itself, and their wives by themselves. And the family of Shemiel by themselves, and their wives by themselves. And all the families that remain, every family by itself, and their wives by themselves. Because they rejected him. That's the day they realize who they rejected. In that moment, they realized that Jesus, the man who they pierced and killed on a cross, was actually the Messiah, the true Son of God, raised from the dead. It was their Messiah that they missed. And one of the important things I got out of that when I was reading that is I realized something. They mourn when they realize what they did to him. Israel mourns when what they did to him. And I always thought about that, and I was thinking about that. It's like, I was sad for my sins when I was a sinner. But when I was truly born again, was the day I realized every one of those sins is what put the nail in the hand of the Son of God. My sin was not, the fact that I committed my sin was not why I was mourning. For me, it was truly the thought that every wrong thing I did, every misspoken word, every lie, was the reason the Son of God, the perfect Lamb of God, the man who never deserved to see any pain, experienced the most atrocious pain you could ever experience. And it's at that moment when you realize that's your sin that put him on the cross. That's the moment Israel has right there. That's the moment Israel gets born again. Is when they realize every one of their sins put their Messiah on the cross. They rejected him. He came to save them. The whole time he was calling to them. He was constantly seeking them. And the whole time they were nailing him to the cross. And the thing we have to realize as Christians is, that's us. We did that. That's why all the songs, when we sing hymns and it talks about that, those are my sins on the cross. My sins put him there. My sins hammered those nails in. And that's the moment Israel gets to right here during the end. And I will pour out on the house of David and on all the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. Part of this great this great outpouring of strength and might to defend Jerusalem will be put an outpouring of the Spirit for the grace of supplication. God will move among Israel and bring saving grace and repentant prayer. Was the comment. This is the moment that God forgives Israel. This is the moment prophesied that we all know is coming. Where in that moment they realize what they did and they repent And God answers their repentance with saving all of Israel that's there in the end times, during the tribulation. And that's where we're going to end tonight. Because that promise is the promise we all have right now. One day, this all ends. All this pain, all this suffering we have to endure, all the sickness, all the loss, all the death, all of it ends in victory. It ends when our Redeemer comes, when the Messiah comes back for us and fixes everything. This is the promise he's giving Israel. He's telling them, look, Rome's going to come and conquer you still. You're going to build your temple. It's going to happen. But you're still going to get punished. You're still under false prophets. You're still under false preachers. Rome's going to stomp on you. But one day, the Messiah is still coming. He's still going to come. No matter how dark it gets out there, no matter what you're facing, no matter what's in the economy, no matter what sickness is at your doorstep, the Messiah is coming. And he's going to make it all new. And that's where we'll end tonight. Father, we thank you for the promises of your word. We thank you for the sacrifice of your Son. We thank you that you loved us so much that even when we were sinners, Lord, you came and died for us to wash us in your blood, the blood of the Lamb. Just like in Passover, we don't have to fear death anymore, Lord, because of that blood. Death has passed over us. It has no sting. Our last breath here will be our first breath with you, Lord, and we thank you for that. We look forward to that day, Lord, and we pray for the constant reminder that you're coming for us, Lord, that you will always press on our heart how near that time is, and that we must work while we still can, Lord. And we thank you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.